ASMR Chess. D4 by Magnus Carlsen, one of two contenders for the honor of the GOAT status, one of two contenders for the title of best chess player in history. D5 by the other contender, with black in the black corner. We see Garry Kasparov. The year is 2004. The site is beautiful Iceland with volcanoes and geysers and the most beautiful nature you can possibly imagine. And the event is a rapid tournament. Magnus plays pawn to c4 and Garry Kasparov plays c6, the Slav defense. This is one of the most famous games ever played. It has like 14 million views on YouTube, and when this game was played, it shook the world. I remember I was not really into chess at this point. I knew I could play, but I hadn't been bitten by the chess bug in the same way. So I didn't know that there was a chess scene. I didn't know that there was like this whole chess world. And I saw it on the news. It was news. This game made headlines all around the world. Why? Knight to f3 by Magnus, who is, at the point of this game, 13 years old. Knight to f6 by Kasparov, who is 28 years older than Magnus. He also happened to be the number one player in the world, and Magnus was number 700, which is quite a step down, but I guess we have to admit it's still a decent ranking for a 13-year-old. And the game was a rapid game, meaning that these moves, like knight to c3 by Magnus, they all had to be made in a relatively short amount of time, less than half an hour for each player. Pawn to e6 by Kasparov, and the Cambridge Springs bishop to g5, pinning the knight to the queen, and Kasparov plays knight b to d7, defending the knight so that this queen is free to move, because of course this pawn here is also defending the knight, but you do not really want to recapture with this pawn because you need it back, you need to be safe, you need these pawns to form a wall of a castle that you will build for your king. That is one of the strategic goals for black in this opening, to castle to the king side and have these pawns intact, to have a very safe king snug as a buck in a rock behind the wall of his castle. So therefore knight b to d7, and now pawn to e3 by Magnus opens up the bishop. It's now defending c4 and can go to e2 or d3, make room for white to castle. Why is this game so important? Why is this game so spectacular? Why is this game so amazing and historical? First of all, it's just an absolutely amazing game of chess. First of all, it's just a really cool game of chess. It's a real battle, you know. It's the pieces are flowing. We see attacks and counterattacks, deep strategical ideas, end-game technique. We see strategy and positional play versus tactical play. It has a lot of what makes chess such a beautiful thing to behold and watch and spectate. Also, there is this sense that every emperor must feel, and I am sure Kasparov felt it during this game. The sense of the new generation coming for your crown. You were able to conquer the entire world if you were a Caesar or a Constantine or a Kasparov. But time, Father Time comes for all of us. Now you are facing this prodigy Magnus Carlsen, who in the last round of this tournament at 13 years old beat your old rival Anatoly Karpov, with whom you played numerous world championship matches, and he was the guy you took the title from. So it's no longer enough to be better than Karpov. Now you have to be better than Magnus also. So there is that archetypal conflict that is part of the human experience, that we try to build something and try to conquer something, but it can be taken away from us by time, by somebody new who can do it better, who is more fresh, who is younger. So there is that going on. Garry played Queen A5. And Magnus played this interesting little move, Knight to E2. You will see what that is about in a short while. And this game is also very, very important in the history of chess, because it just so happens that Magnus, who is playing white, and Garry, who is playing with the black pieces, well, it just so happens that these two players have emerged as the two primary contenders for the title, for the honor of being called the greatest chess player, not in their time, but of all time. The third guy who is also a bit in contention is Bobby Fischer, who I have made some videos about, but the consensus seemed to be that his reign was so short that Magnus and Kasparov both eclipse him because, well, they have dominated the world of chess for many, many years. At this point, Carlsen has been number one for more than 10 years today in 2022. And when Kasparov stopped playing chess in 2005, he was still number one in the world, and he had been so for 20 years, which is frankly astonishing. And they haven't played many games, these two. Kasparov played bishop to b4, putting some serious pressure on this knight. Now bishop can take, pawn takes, and queen takes. That would win a pawn. So queen to c2 protects. And castles by black. They haven't played many games, no. Of what I know of, they have played 4 games in total, 3 in this tournament game in 2020. And I will also cover that last game. So of course, in trying to figure out who the greatest chess player of all time is, which seemed to be a discussion that is ever relevant and ever interesting, we of course must look at this gem of a game. Magnus at this point chooses his scheme of development. This is undoubtedly part of his opening preparation. He plays bishop to e2. Kasparov was known as this tactical, dynamic monster who would just seize on the smallest opportunity, grab it, and plow through your position and checkmate you, often sacrificing 3 pieces, just out-calculating everybody. And in order to make ferocious, beautiful attacks, you need to activate your pieces. So this sleeping rook, this sleeping bishop, and this sleeping rook, that simply won't do for a guy like Kasparov, so he plays pawn to e5. Here we go. Now it's time to get tactical. This move is designed to open up the center, to bust the position wide open and get away from the calm, positional, dynamic chess that Magnus likes to play, and get into the wild, attacking, very concrete chess that Garry likes to play. We don't see any captures here, no. Magnus, just castles. He wants to be solid. He wants to be solid. And Kasparov says, okay, well, I'm coming for you. Pawn takes on d4. And it would be very natural for a guy like me to just recapture with this pawn. After all, isn't that why the pawn is here? But no, we see knight to b3, attacking the queen. So Garry doesn't have time to capture the knight. The queen will be lost and it will have to move. So queen b6. Also just keeping an eye, defending a little bit here. But now the knight, hello, I can see you, can also see the pawn. So when Magnus plays e takes d, like so, the queen cannot swoop in and capture. It would be lost to the mighty knight. This knight here, protecting this square, is a positional concept that Magnus is using in this particular game, because he will end up with an isolated pawn here. This pawn will be isolated and a target for Kasparov to attack. And you can see how it starts already now. Pawn takes c4. It's okay, it's defended by the bishop. Bishop takes c4. But now this has become an isolated pawn. What does that mean? It means that there are no pawns next to it that can protect it. So that makes it a target, because you will have to defend it with pieces that you would rather have do something more active than defend a less valuable piece. And Kasparov can maybe smell something here. Can he win an easy game against the 13-year-old upstart who is trying to say that he belongs in the same tournament as the mighty Garry Kasparov? Can we just win this pawn and win an easy positional game? Just have a little attack here, use some brilliant tactics that you, as Kasparov, of course, know that you excel at. It was a bit of that, sprinkle it on the position, win this pawn in a nice, semi-ferocious way, then let the waves calm over the chessboard and just take the point home in a slow positional grind where you use the advantage you got in the middle game. Wouldn't that be an easy, practical way to go about this game? So let's get at this pawn here. A5. How is this A5 move attacking the pawn? Well, in a simple way, because if Garry got to move again and play A4, the knight would have to move. It doesn't have any good squares. For instance, C5 is attacked 1, 2, 3 times, so it would be chopped off, and no matter where it goes, it is no longer protecting the D4 pawn, which is already under attack by the queen here. So there is no way that we can allow A5 to be played. And Magnus did not fall for something like this. He played A4, stopping the pawn in its tracks and saying, okay, old man, I know you want to attack, but the way I'm playing this, I'm just saying your pieces are not effective. I'm not allowing you to get the free-flowing dynamic sort of position that you want. And when you don't get that, I'm not sure you can win. And it is true here. How exactly can we, as black, get a free-flowing position? These rooks still asleep. We tried the break, we created the isolated pawn, we tried to undermine it, but Magnus just kept his positional grip on the game, and rook A and rook B, or rather rook A and rook F, it should be, they are still asleep, and the light squared bishop also asleep. And they sort of get in each other's way, right? It's clunky, it's awkward, it's not free-flowing, it's not elegant. So what will Kasparov do to develop his gameplay from here? We see queen to c7. What is that about? Well, it's saying, okay, this pawn, you can have that. I'm not going to capture that anyway. I just wanted you to clarify the position here on the queen side, and to make you show your hand. Okay, that is how you're going to build your position. Now I will go to c7. I will look at h2. I will look at your king. That's one thing. But now this knight that previously hadn't anywhere to go can potentially come to b6. Now it has been vacated by the queen. But Magnus is, well, he's a positional player, but he can play attacking chess, of course. And he knows that he needs his pieces alert, awake, and active. So he slides this rook over. Rook A to e1. So now this rook is nice and active. Looking at this file here, Kasparov wants to coordinate an attack against the king here. That is where he feels the most at home, and that is also what the position calls for. But first he plays h6, a cunning little move and a very good move for you to take note of if you are an improving player, if you're just getting into play chess. So notice this move here. It attacks the bishop, but you could say, well, the bishop just moves back. Bishop h4. So what did you gain from that? Well, now there is an escape hatch here for the king. The king now has h7 to where it can go. We call that to create Luft. That's a German word. It's actually the same word in Danish. Create air, create space for the king so it can escape if it gets attacked inside the castle. You can think of it like the priest holes, if you know what that is. When the Catholics were being persecuted in England, the many rich and wealthy aristocratic families would build so-called priest holes, or they would even dig tunnels from their big castles, their manors, so that when people came, the government came for the Catholic priest, they could open open a secret door, and the priest could go underground through the tunnel and get out somewhere else, and they could help their priest like that. That's the kind of idea going on here. Also, the bishop is maybe a little worse here on h4. Okay, enough about that. We see bishop d6, forming a battery with the queen, attacking h2. We don't want that to be captured. We could defend it in various ways, probably not like this, because we will run into this, but maybe like so. But why not just mimic the great Kasparov and play this very standard idea? That's nice. Now you also have a bit of luft for your king. Also, knight g4 is no longer really possible because it can be captured. Just a slight improvement of the position. Very calm, very patient in this game. Also, this move doesn't do much. Doesn't give Kasparov much to work with. So where a move like bishop to g3, we could have had that as a focal point of an attack, but there is no such there's no such way to actually crack the position opening. Crack the position open. It has been very, very solid play for white. And at this point, it was that history was made in a way, because Kasparov got fed up. He simply got fed up with this kid who is just playing way too solidly, and this kid is just, his positional understanding is just too good. There's going to be no easy technical victory. And his pieces are still asleep. They're still, jumping. They're still standing on each other's toes. They're getting in each other's way. So let's play knight to b6, attacking the bishop. And the next 6 or 7 moves are just amazing, because what's this move about? What's going on here? Because what Kasparov did with knight to b6 was that he said, I will make the position dynamic and crazy, even though I may sacrifice some of the soundness of my structure. Because I am Garry freaking Kasparov, and I can outcalculate everyone, and I will outcalculate you. But could he? The bishop is under attack. 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen did not move the bishop. He played a sequence of moves that is frankly astonishing, and also just the courage it would take to play this sequence on against Kasparov, just banking on, just trusting yourself, saying, this is what I have calculated, to me it looks good, I will play it. He played bishop takes f6. Why? Well, if Kasparov needs to recapture with the g pawn, then his king safety will be severely compromised. So he will of course have to play knight takes c4, knight for a bishop. That's a fair trade. Now Kasparov can get the pieces flowing. But there's one thing he didn't consider, and that is, in creating this dynamic position, he also allowed Magnus's pieces to flow. And this knight floats like a butterfly, but it stings like a bee. And it went to e4, defending the bishop. And a knight on f6, that can be trouble. I will talk a little bit more about that. But let's first see all of the things, just an overview of the power of this knight. Because it's also looking at the bishop. Can come in and capture this bishop. And it revealed an attack from the queen on the knight. So, Kasparov cannot capture the bishop because knight takes, so g takes f6, we would see knight f6, check. And this will just spell disaster very, very quickly. The king cannot go here. That's checkmate immediately. So the king would have to go here. We still play queen h7 check. King captures the knight. Queen takes h6. Check, only one move again. King to f5, and what is the checkmate? g4 checkmate. So, of course, Kasparov saw that at the blink of an eye. He's not going to capture that knight. But then he's not going to capture that bishop, rather. But then what is he going to do? What is he going to do? Because he's going to lose this knight. So, what can he do? He plays bishop h2 check. But the king can just go to h1. And then he played knight d6. It's a typical way of dealing with this by Kasparov. So now he's saying, okay, if you capture my knight, I can just come back and capture with my bishop. I will have untangled my position. We are equal on material. You will have to move this bishop, and I'm very comfortable here. And surely you're not going to capture the bishop. Surely you're not going to capture the bishop. You are not going to allow me to get all sorts of discovered checks, right? You're not going to do that. Imagine giving a discovered check to Kasparov, where his queen checks your king. Let's see. King takes bishop, and the knight, for instance, knight captures knight, gets closer to your king. And you have to move. Surely you are not going to calculate all that and then think you can capture the bishop and then think that I didn't already calculate all of that and found out that you couldn't. Surely. And Kasparov looked on in horror as 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen picked up the king, and like it was the most natural thing in the world, which it was to him, trusted his intuition and his calculation and captured the bishop, allowing the seemingly deadly and very, very scary knight takes e4 check. Not check from the knight, check for the queen. Check from the queen to his majesty. just bishop back, blocks the check, attacks the queen. Now the knight is attacked, and there is a sort of way for Kasparov to back out of this. Knight back to d6. But he bit off maybe a little bit more than he could chew here, because he sacrificed the positional soundness upon which he had built his game so far for the dynamism, and then he saw this young prodigy seize the dynamism, seize the initiative, and just take all this beautiful dynamism and turn it against him. Queen c5. That's a problem. All of this tactical sequence, and now we have a double attack against this knight. It's only defended once. Of course, rook d8 defends it. But can you see on what part of the board we are playing now? We are no longer in white's camp. We are now crossing the line here in the middle. We are now in black's side of the board, and we are attacking. And let's just push this attack on. Let's see that queen. It's a precariously placed queen. Pawn to d5 here. You cannot capture. Why? Because the pawn is pinned to the queen. Queen is not defended. If the pawn went on some adventure capturing pawns, well, it would leave the lady alone and undefended. We can't have that. The knight also, can't move that. It's also pinned to the queen. This move may be what Kasparov really missed. How strong this is, and how all the wonderful dynamism is being turned against him now. 3 pieces across the line here that divides his kingdom, the black kingdom, from the white kingdom. We have 3 invaders so far. The queen has to play to d7 to get out of all these pins, but knight to d4, knight to d4, looking at c6, looking at e6, b5, f5, 4 important squares in black's side of the board, now under attack. Kasparov played the best move. He has a tendency to do that, so he played knight f5, saying, I'll just chop off some pieces, trade off, it's going to be fine. But Magnus was not sure about that. He played pawn takes c6. So there's no time to capture this knight. The queen is under attack. B takes c6. And now just knight takes c6. The audacity. 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen invaded Garry Kasparov's kingdom, the black side of the board, and just snatched a pawn, saying, what are you going to do about it, old man? Since the time of Steinitz, Wilhelm Steinitz, it has been known that a pawn, an extra pawn in the hands of a skilled player, should in most cases be enough to win a game of chess. The knight is also saying, hello, rook. And the rook is saying, oh, hell no. Armor. Go to e8. Does not want to be captured. That would basically just lose the game. And what is it I always say? What is it I always say on this channel? You want to control the center, right? So 1, 2, 3 pieces here has just made a spear formation through the center into black's territory. What is the result of this? The result is that black's pieces are so cramped now. They have, for the longest time, they were asleep. They did not get out of their original. They did not get into the game. And now it may be too late. Rook to d1, attacking the queen. And how many squares does this queen really have where it can go? Not that many. Not that many, no. Not that many. Queen goes to e6. And here we saw a slight inaccuracy by Magnus Carlsen. So there are two moves that he really wants to play. He wants to play bishop c7 and rook e1, just activating his last piece, looking at the queen, and just cementing his dynamic attacking advantage. And what could be more natural than playing rook from f to e1 on the first move? Then he could play bishop c7 afterwards, right? That's a good plan, trap the queen and everything. He should, however, have played bishop c7 first. It attacks a5, and in many variations it threatens the very cool looking knight to d8. So that would have been the precise way to keep all of the advantage. He let some amount of his advantage slip with rook from f to e1. White is still better though. White is still significantly better in this position, mostly because of the extra pawn. The cramped nature, however, of black's position is about to be solved. That problem is about to be solved by Kasparov, because he did have time now. He wouldn't have had if we saw bishop c7, but now he could play bishop b7. So now you can't play bishop c7 because it's not trapping the queen. This bishop is attacking the c6 knight. The queen can come in and capture it. Black would be winning. So bishop to b7 solves the problem of these invaders. It solves the problem of the pieces being asleep. You can now see both rooks. They are now connected. They are active. The bishop is active. Everything, every single piece in black's camp is doing something important and worthwhile. It's not all good though, because he has 4 pawns and black has 5. The knight is attacked. Magnus played knight d4, attacking the queen. And here Kasparov, he was way ahead on time on the clock at this point also. He saw an opportunity to simplify the game, which is an interesting choice. So how did he do it? First he played knight takes knight. We saw queen takes knight. And then queen g6. So why would he simplify? Why would he trade down when he's behind in material? We usually always say that when you are behind in material, you want to keep material on the board. When you are ahead, like Magnus is, on material, you want to trade off, because every equal trade gives you more of an advantage. You can think of it like if we are in an end game and I have 8 pawns and you have 7 pawns, and we just trade 1 for 1, we will end up in a situation where I have 1 pawn and you have 0 pawns. I will use that to make a queen. Much easier because you won't have any counterplay, and the game will be easy for me. So why is he playing like this? Why is Kasparov playing like this? It is because of the relationship of these two bishops, and maybe we see the greater experience of Kasparov reflected in this strategy, that he knows a way out here. So what's the relationship with these two bishops? Well, they are in different dimensions. They can never touch, they can never meet. They are like Romeo and Juliet, maybe. Like this guy is in the dark square complex of the chessboard, in the dark dimension, and this guy is in the light square dimension of the chessboard. And endgames with opposite colored bishops are very hard to win, actually. Very hard, very tough. Even though you have an advantage, you get a lot of draws with opposite colored bishops. So Kasparov just trying to get into opposite colored endgame. Opposite colored bishop endgame. And just draw the game from there. He could also just go and checkmate here on g2 if Magnus allows it. Of course, Magnus won't. He plays queen g4. But again, we see Kasparov seemingly breaking the principle of trading down when he's behind in material. Queen takes queen. And of course, pawn takes queen. But now we are in an endgame. And it's going to be quite tough, maybe, for white to win, even with the extra pawn. And also you saw with the exchange here, this pawn became a doubled pawn. If you look at these two pawns, you can see this guy can only ever go as far as his brother is going, because otherwise he will be blocked, or he will have to capture something. So this pawn is worse now. So the extra pawn that Magnus has is a worse pawn than it was before. And here we see the frankly pretty amazing endgame technique from Kasparov. So first, just bishop c6, attacking the pawn. Not a problem. We defend the pawn. So Magnus plays b3. But then f6. Okay, what's the point here? Magnus plays bishop c3, attacking the pawn. This should be pretty good for me, maybe. Rook takes rook, like so. That forces rook takes rook, obviously. Could consider capturing with the bishop, maybe. But the rook trade is forced here. And now bishop d5, attacking the backward pawn here. You can't easily move it forward without trading it off. Magnus doesn't feel ready to do that just yet. This is his winning pawn. The majority of 2-1 here on the queen on the queen side. That is his trump card. That is what he wants to use to win this game. So he defends rook b1. Now it's defended. Kasparov, he knows all the little details, everything that you must know to play such an endgame. You need the participation of every single resource you have at your disposal. Therefore, king to f7. The king has to come out of the castle, become an active piece, because otherwise you are just leaving value on the table. You are not utilizing everything you have. And in order to draw this position, you will need everything you have as black. Magnus knows this as well. King to g3. And now rook comes to b8 and attacks the pawn. So will this pawn just be lost? Will we just get an symmetrical position? No. because the pawn can go to b4. So Garry, by forcing this move, gets the option to play a takes b. Magnus replies, bishop takes b4. And now bishop c4, so that after a5, bishop can come to a6. And now it's kind of clear why it can be tough to win these opposite colored bishop endgames. Because if we look at this guy, how can we chase him away? The pawn can't chase him away. The bishop can't chase him away. So we will need the rook, a more valuable, more powerful piece, to come and see if it can chase it away. And so white doesn't have that many ways, and he has to use his most powerful piece to try and chase this bishop away. And if he can't, this bishop will forever block this pawn. And if this pawn can never move, it might as well not be on the board. If it's not on the board, we just have 3 pawns versus 3 pawns. That's an easy draw. That's an easy draw. So that is what Kasparov is playing for. How is Magnus trying to handle this? First, just a little move, kind of funny, f3, and it solidifies this pawn. It also makes sure that there are like no checks here. And this is all about Magnus wants to, he has like a slight problem here. He will find a way to fix it, but he has to figure out how to activate this bishop. He would very much have to have it here, so they defend each other. But as soon as he moves, of course, he loses his rook. So that's a problem. And he's just trying to get a very solid position here on the king side so that he can fix this slight inconvenience over here. King to g6 by Kasparov. King f4. Active kings here, facing off. And h5. Further simplifying the position. Magnus captures. G takes h5. Check. King takes h5. Magnus saw his chance. He can now move the rook away from the defense of the bishop without the bishop being captured, because he can play a rook h1. That is check. King will have to move. It goes to g6. And now Magnus can play bishop to c5. The bishop will come here, and now his position is quite easy to play. Now we just need to get rid of this pesky bishop here. But oops, something happened there. Kasparov was allowed to be active. He activates the rook. Rook b2. It attacks g2. Okay, king goes back. Defends. Now the king is a little less active. It's tied up to the defenders of this pawn. And the rook can now go to a2, putting a little bit of pressure on this pawn. It's okay. Bishop b6, that's what Magnus wanted to play anyway, and it protects the pawn. But now a bit of a mysterious move. King f7. What's going on? Magnus activates his rook. Rook c1 can now come in with checks. But what's this? g5. So that after rook check, the king can move up the board. Magnus still up a pawn, but we see an attacking formation. In actuality, there are 2 squares now, that the king can't go to. Is that going to be a problem? Well, yes, it is going to be a problem. Magnus plays rook c6. So this is looking at this pawn here on f6. We can try and attack that in a very nice way with bishop to d8. It's be very, very tough to defend that position. There's just one problem. Kasparov, like lightning, picked up his bishop and played bishop to f1. So basically the same sort of idea, connecting like Magnus wants to play bishop d8 and attack this pawn in coordination with his rook, but Kasparov was faster in coordinating his bishop and his rook. They are now looking at g2. And you can see the problem. This pawn here is taking away these squares, so if we did see check, it would be almost be checkmate. Only one legal move here is king h3, and now just rook anywhere is check, and we will win the rook, so it's certainly going to be game over if the rook is allowed to capture. There is a way to defend, a single way, and that is bishop to f2, blocking the view of this rook. Now we can't come in and capture, but at this point Kasparov offered a draw, and Magnus Carlsen accepted the draw. Why is that, and what is the relevant for the history of chess? The reason he offered the draw, and the reason Magnus accepted, is that Kasparov can now play rook takes a5, gaining his pawn back. We still have the opposite drawish bishops here, and we have 2 versus 2 with the kings protecting them, and the rooks. This is an easy technical draw. There's just no way that either player can get anything other than a draw from this position. But what is the relevance to chess and to chess history here? We could say that it's quite disappointing that Magnus didn't win, maybe. But I would say that it's just absolutely amazing that he got a draw against Garry freaking Kasparov. If you are new to chess, if you are new in the chess world, you may look at the dominance of Magnus Carlsen and think, okay, that's a unique thing in chess. But at the point in time where this game was played, Kasparov had that position of just absolutely dominating the world of chess. He had that for 19 years straight. So to get a draw at 13-year-old against that guy is a sign of great talent. And I want to talk. They played also 2 other games in the tournament where Kasparov just won, like he won most games. That's not the relevant part here. The relevant part is how incredibly well Magnus played at such a young age. He tried to get revenge in 2020 when they played, and maybe I should do a video on that. Leave a comment below if you think I should do a video on that game, Magnus Carlsen versus Garry Kasparov in 2020. Anyways, that's the game. I hope you liked it. I sure did. I hope you felt relaxed, and I hope I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. watching.